Hi, my name is Betsy Robles, and today I'll be talking about invasive species. Invasive species are important because they affect the environment that they're invading and the creatures and other organisms inside that environment. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, what's an invasive species, or what causes invasive species? Or maybe you're even wondering, why should I care so much about invasive species? Today, we'll learn that how invasive species affect our planet. Now, before I continue, I'll go over what an invasive species is. An invasive species can be any living organism that is put in an area that it is non-native to. Eventually, that species can overpopulate and overtake the area that it is in, causing harm to the creatures inside and the other organisms inside that area. So, we'll learn how invasive species grow and affect our planet. Let's take a look at what causes invasive species. One of the main causes of invasive species is environmental change. Wilkie in 2002 wrote in Climate Change, Forests, and SIDs that an increase in CO2 level benefits the growth of invasive species. He also mentions an increase in frequency and intensity of tropical storms can establish a further expansion in invasive species. This typically happens because most invasive species are able to adapt much faster to changes than the species that are native to those areas. Therefore, the invasive species takes advantage of it to expand and populate during these changes. In Van der Gogh and others' article, Journal of Sea Research, they talk about an invasive brackish water bivalve. Bivalve is a type of oyster/mussel that is native to this specific bivalve. Bivalve is native to the Gulf of Mexico and the southern Atlantic coast of North America. They developed research and data and realized that in higher temperatures, the bivalve would spatfall sooner versus in the temperature being lower. Spatfall is when the oyster or mussel younglings will settle in a certain area. In 2015, Barney and others wrote the article of propagule pressure, and they saw the success of invasions were resulted because of functional traits that interact with the receiving community. It also mentions that propagule pressure affects the development of the species. So propagule pressure is the measure of the numbers of individuals that are released in a certain area, leading to believe that temperatures would affect the expansion of invasive creatures. So we've seen how environmental change has been one of the main causes of invasive species. Now we're going to continue, and what have been the effects of invasive species? The second is the effect on the environment these species have caused. In 2005, Smith and others wrote about population dynamics of an invasive green algae. This type of green algae has spread from the rocky subtidal habitats to the tide pools on the Atlantic coast. And this algae has overtaken meadows that were once dominant with kelp. And the harshness has increased against marine species because of its growth in the summer, causing most marine species to move out of those tide pools and subtidal habitats. In 2011, Bew, Chap, and one other wrote the article about plumage mimicry in birds. So they talk about how a lot of birds tend to mimic different flocks so that they can invade it. Mimicry is basically when something or someone tries to imitate something, and that's what a lot of these types of birds do. Like the dark-colored European starling typically joins flocks of North American blackbirds, and what they tend to do is they spread diseases in the flocks and destroy many crops, like human crops, and they develop a lot in when they join these huge flocks. And it affects humans, animals that are fed with the crops that they destroy. So we have seen the effects and harms that some of these creatures that I have mentioned have caused. So in conclusion, we talked about the causes and the effects of invasive species, and we've seen how environmental change is one of the main causes of the growth and expansion of these species. We've seen how CO2 levels, temperatures, and propagule pressure have affected the growth and expansion of the species. And we also have seen the effects that some of these species have caused, like the invasive green algae, who has kicked many animals out of the subtidal habitats in tide pools. And we've seen how they've taken over meadows that were once dominant with kelp. And we've also seen how the dark-colored European starling joins flocks of North American blackbirds and overtakes the flocks and spreads disease and causes damage to crops. So many of these species are under control. However, there are still a lot of invasive species that are causing harm and damage to many environments and creatures and organisms. And if they aren't put under control, they can lead to loss of habitats, loss of ecosystems, and even lead to extinctions of some organisms. So that was my speech on invasive organisms. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.